Okay, we're on.
The question is, why did I allow this situation to happen today? Because I was fortunate enough to see the first showing that you had of people who had lived under segregation. But then as I read this title, I said, my segregation was a little different from this segregation. Because here you think of white people segregating against black people. But you see, in my case, here's the title: Voices of Baltimore, Life Under Double Segregation. The word double, that means that I was not only segregated by white people, but I was also segregated by black people, African Americans. So, and that was another part of my life that said that the world does not know about them, because that never comes up. You never identify. I think now we talk about it more than ever before, that uh, black people segregated against each other as strongly as white folks did against them. They're smiling still, but it indicates that I had a pleasant life. And but when I was 3 years old, not three, I was in the third grade. And this teacher, I was very quiet. I didn't talk much, a little different from now. And the teacher wanted the children to sit well, and said, "Come on, sit up." And she said, "I'm going to see who can walk around this room with the book on their head." And of course, everybody who tried, I didn't volunteer because I was a quiet little girl. So everybody that wanted to walked around the room, but the book always fell off their heads. So I raised my hand and said, well, maybe I can do that. And I walked around the room, and the book did not fall off my head. And the teacher, everybody was so surprised that that happened for me. And that's the first experience I've had with the public. And of course, the teachers gave me a prize. Guess what it was? The apple off her desk.
Oh, now why did you decide to become an educator?
Because my father couldn't write his name. He became through the time when white people would not allow slaves or black people to go to school or to read. And if a nice white person wanted to help you read or understand something, they would punish that white person or kill them. So, but my mother came through South Carolina, Honea Path, a place called Honea Path, South Carolina. And of course, there they would be lynching people all the time, you know. So one time a friend of theirs was lynched. So she and her family decided they were going to move away. And they came to Baltimore. Now my father came from Virginia. And of course, back in the 1860s and 1870s, they did not allow blacks to go to school at all. So my father couldn't write his name. So instead of writing his name anytime, I would have to do it. So it made me see that education was important, because my father couldn't write his name. My mother just was only allowed to go to the 8th grade. And then the way they treated blacks in that time in the South, they moved to Baltimore. And so I said, my mother, I believe, if she had had an opportunity, would have been a teacher, because she sort of motivated me to be one.
So tell us about your schooling. Where did you go to school?
Well, elementary school, they had numbers, just as I've said. And all schools had numbers, and I went to school 160. Went to school, the elementary schools. This is a high school, so it had a number also. And I don't remember all the numbers, 102 and 10, had a 100 number. Every black school had a 100 number, because that way you could tell they were black schools. Because if you were going to talk about a school, talk it by its number. Now, when integration came and they stopped calling schools by numbers, we didn't even know who the schools were, because we had only known them by numbers. So, in that way, The two-digit school numbers were white. The 200 school numbers were white, but the 100 school numbers, 102, 104, 160, all black, because you knew by the number. And what did you ask me?
That's your other schooling from this school here.
Oh yeah, that was interesting. When I finished Douglas, my parents could not afford to send me to college. But there was this school out there called Coppin, Teachers College. And my mother was excited about that because I really think she wanted to be a teacher. So she said, wanted to see if I qualified. The qualification was that you must have an 80 overall average in high school and 80 in English. And that way I was admitted to Coppin Teachers College. That's what it was called back then. And it was on the third floor of School 132. So that's how I got involved in education and got my BS degree from Coppin because it was just like going from high school to Coppin at that time on the third floor, and you made the requirements and you didn't have to pay anything because they couldn't afford it at that time.
Tell us about the University of Maryland.
Well, I can't skip Howard.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go back to Howard.
Now, when I finished Coppin Teachers College, I had to pass the National Teachers Exam to become a teacher. And of course, I passed. And I became a teacher in 1930. I graduated in 39. I graduated from Coppin in 43. And in 1943, I became a teacher. And I've been teaching ever since 1943. Now, the interesting thing, my mother said, go to the top. My mother always, don't stop, keep going. So here I am finishing college. My mother said, go to the top. That which meant she wanted me to get my master's degree. Well, how am I going to get a master's degree? Well, there's always some good white people that look out for you, you know. So some people in Maryland said, allow the people who are in education and who maintain their work, allow them to select a school outside of Maryland, and we'll pay for their tuition and their travel and all that. And that's what happened. I met qualifications. I decided to go to Howard University. So at the expense of the Baltimore City and the state of Maryland, I received my master's degree from Howard University. Then, of course, that was just a master's degree, and my mother said, go to the top. So that meant I'm teaching all the time, doing stuff, you know, in education, principal, vice principal, teacher education, curriculum, all that I'm doing on the way up. So, well, here we'll have come a long ways now. Well, we're trying to get this other degree. So I applied to University of Maryland, and they told me that the only way I could come would be I would have to, at first they sent me a letter of rejection. Now, when somebody rejects you, do you get upset or do you give up? Nope, not my mother, not me. So I wrote them a nice little note and said, thanks for considering my application, but tell me what I needed to do to qualify to be accepted in your doctoral program. And of course, they had rejected it. So I said, well, tell me what I needed to do to qualify. Now, they couldn't say change the color of the skin, could they? They couldn't say that. So they said, well, we have reconsidered your application, and you may come to our school, but you must maintain a 3.3 grade point average. I made a grade 3.678 grade point average, and I have a copy of all that right here. So here I go, graduating from University of Maryland with my doctorate degree, and that's how I get that little name, EDD, Doctor of Education.
Okay, that's a remarkable story that you have, that you shared with us. what was it like growing up during Jim Crowism, legal segregation?
Well, since we were all together all the time, we had fun. We had family experiences. The church people were all together. They helped each other. Community people helped each other. School people helped each other. Organizations that had social organizations in the community, we all worked together. Now, of course, we had challenges, and as you would have, but basically, during segregation, black folks helped each other. Now, here's the other part about it, but the part two, segregation. Remember, we have about 4 or 5 different levels of colors of skin in the black race. And I had 3 strikes against me. I was African American. I was a female African American. And I was a dark-skinned female African American. So, according to that time, I had to suffer the consequences of being dark-skinned. But of course, my mother and I agreed that 3 strikes, you win anyhow. And that's what happened to the rest of me, because my mother didn't know, you're dark-skinned, this is how God wants you to be. And how did those other people get to be other colors? Because the slave masters had babies by the slave women.
Well, Dr. Pratt, could you please tell me, or tell us, I should ask, what are your thoughts today about African Americans and African Americans in Baltimore City Public Schools, based on what you hear in the news and your interaction and coming to and from Douglas and doing things at Coppin?
Well,
give us your opinion on what did anything go wrong? Is it getting better? What?
All right. Now, first of all, when schools were segregated, they always told us it was separate but equal. Well, we knew they weren't separate but equal, because when we received our textbooks, the stamp for Poly or Western or some of the white schools was already in the book, which means that they had collected these old books, sent them to us, and they got the new books. But our teachers were dedicated, and they said, now, we're going to support or look up what these people have sent us in these books. See if it's true. Go to Enoch Pratt Free Library. Now, Enoch Pratt Library, that's on Cathedral, I believe that's where it still is. We used to go to the Cathedral Library so much to reinforce, to get new information, be up to date on things, for our homework, for our teachers, that we almost lived there. But because our teachers were dedicated, and the teacher says, now, to get out in the world as a black person, you got to be twice as good. So therefore, my mother and my teachers, all your relatives, made you have high standards for everything.
How can Baltimore City schools get better?
Now, to tell you about that. The schools had excellent programs. They had music, they had art, they had physical education, they had Latin, they had all kinds of languages that we could use at different levels, learn to be. Couldn't keep them, but at least you were exposed to them. And they had home economics and workshops for men who could learn. When they came out of high school, they could go get a job in a workshop someplace, painting or fixing stuff. And if you came out of high school, you could sew, because they taught you how to sew in high school, home economics they call it, and how to cook. So when you came out of our schools, it was a full program. You studied how to make a life, how to live after you got out of school, because many other people back then did not go to college. So they had to find out how to live and make a living. So when they left high school, this school like Douglas, that was on Baker Street, that's a whole nother story, they could go get a job immediately. And that's how, and then of course, now you look at the schools nowadays. You have is music still in school nowadays? But you see, I learned to play the saxophone. My mother made us all play the piano, by the way. When we were growing up in elementary school, my mother said, you got to play the piano. Now, still have that old upright piano in my basement right now that my mother taught us how to play the piano. Then as I went to high school, the high school, not the junior high, but I went to athletics and the choirs, and I started playing the saxophone, so I was busy. And I was so busy in school, late coming home from school. Every day I'm late coming home from school. My mother said, well, why are you so late today? And I said, well, I was in physical education. Why are you so late today? Oh, I was in the choir. And so one day she didn't say anything. She came up to the school to see if I was really there. And she did, and I was. And then after that, I could stay in all these different kinds of programs. But those are the things that are missing in the schools today. They are, and of course, I'm going to bring up this other point here about segregation. Although we were segregated, the parents, the teachers, the students, everybody was sort of dedicated to success. I want to get better. I don't want to be like my grandmother or like a slave. So, and it's with that our schools continue to be very good. Now here comes integration. Well, they were not equal, separate but equal. But we knew they weren't. But just like I was saying, that there are white people who are concerned about us being human beings, not just, 3/5 of a person? We're a whole person. So they have a saying that we should have, all the schools should be equal and have equal opportunities. But of course the schools now, because they're integrated, I find that integration was not beneficial for black education.
Okay, Dr. Pratt, thank you so much. Well, I mean, you just gave us a wealth of information. Beautiful. I love always talking to you. Now we got to let Dr. Nicholson and Max Simpson interview them as well.